Dave Anderson, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Hey, thank you for coming in. You work with American Farmland Trust, 501c3. Your goal of American Farmland Trust is to help preserve ag land and advocate for policies that, again, help preserve ag land, the functionality of it, something that you can pass down from generation to generation. This is such a fundamental piece of Idaho. It almost can't be overstated. And obviously, people like me moving here are disrupting or complicating things because naturally, as land value increases, as pressures and difficulties mount around farmers, trying to farm between houses and things like that, there's a sentiment where it's like, okay, let's just sell and get out, right? Sell to a developer, whatever. We had this for like 3-4 generations, but then it's over. The second the houses go on that property, the second you grow houses, that property's never, ever going back to operation. And again, this is such a fundamental piece. It's like every single house like mine that gets built, it's like a little tiny piece of Idaho history dies forever. And wow, we're starting this off very optimistically. But you work for an organization that helps landowners figure out a way to have some benefit by preserving land. Help me understand this.
Yeah. And I think it goes, we'll talk about working landowners, but really what we're talking about is the broader community. And one of the things that I'd like to share with people just to baseline the conversation is that think about food systems, right? Systems in the sense of that, we all are a singular point in a larger system. And when we talk about food systems, then we're talking about then, what is that greater network of growers, right? Whether they're growing crops, whether they're growing animals, whether they're growing grains and other foods that are either leaving the state to be processed and then are coming back into our stores in some way. But ultimately, what is that system that is ultimately bringing the food to your table that you're eating on a regular basis, that you're eating with your family, right? And then what are the resources that are coming in to that system in order to make sure that that system remains viable, right? And I think why that's important is that, we just recently had this thing called a pandemic. And I think for the first time, how many of us went to a store and experienced an empty shelf, right? And I think what it revealed to us is that despite all of our great efforts, the Green Revolution and we're growing more food per acre than we ever have, right? We continue to feed the world and billions of people successfully, is the fact that, our supply chain systems are fragile. And so, one of the things we anecdotally saw here happen in the Treasure Valley during the pandemic years is that we saw a 60% increase in sales in our local growers. All right. And so I noticed that you had Brad McIntyre.
He's the best. McIntyre Farms, McIntyre Pastures. Yeah, he's the best. Yeah.
Yeah. So McIntyres are a good example, right, of somebody in our local food system that actually had the bandwidth, right? They had the capacity to be able to scale up and be able to feed us locally amongst another, and you had Tammy Halcomb on here, right?
Yes.
Fair Idaho.
Yes.
Fair Idaho has a large membership of local growers, right? And they're continuing to foster and getting those folks connected to markets and restaurants and to people like us.
Yes.
Buyers.
If I may, real fast, with Fair Idaho, I think their model is bonkers cool because their whole point is, okay, look, we have these individual growers, local growers that a lot of times get pushed out of being able to supply larger buyers, right? So that could be a restaurant chain. It could be pretty much anything. But they're like, look, I don't have the capacity to hit your 500 pound or unit mark in whatever time frame, but I can put up 50 to 60, and Fair works to combine different smaller localized people so they can get the contract and collectively push to get that 500 unit of whatever it might be it produce or protein, but get that amount that the buyer actually needs, but the buyer then doesn't have to outsource to an outside area, right? They don't have to go bigger. They can utilize the smaller locally grown, smaller local producers, which I think is so cool. It's like, God, who would have thought? Like, you just piece it together and they are part of like, okay, this is a contract. This is what we need from all of you guys, and we'll make this happen.
Yeah, exactly. So we we tend to really focus, I think, in on our growers, and we over romanticize it. I think Brad has some good stories to tell. You're down in the mud, you're down in the crap, right? It isn't easy. And it's a 24/7 job. It's hard to get away from it. And I'm very grateful that they're willing to do that for us so that we can have, clean, healthy food to eat, right? So when we talk about agricultural viability, what we're talking about is how can we, as the rest of the community that are really dependent upon these local food systems, do a better job of meeting our growers halfway, right? They have all of these pressures on them these days. They have operational pressures. They have development pressure. We'll talk about that. And they have successional pressures right now. Like, who's going to come back to take care of the farm? Who's going to come back and run the ranch? Maybe my kids aren't coming back, but I still want to have the ability to pass that farm or ranch on to a new generation, right? So they have all of these pressures going on out there right now. So how do we come together as a community under the greater umbrella of community resilience in order to better basically proactively plan to protect our food systems, right? And why do we do that? You know what? I'm a prepper. I'm a full-on prepper, and I know that means a lot of different things to people. I will tell you, no, I don't have, a bunker of guns in the basement of my house. It doesn't mean I have 90 days of food storage, out of my garage. But what it does mean is I think that we have a responsibility to our children and future generations to see to it that we are planning to protect our water and our land access so that we have constant access of local food in order to offset those times when, guess what, our systems break down, right?
And you have to grow it somewhere. Like, this has to happen somewhere. And the more we get removed from it, the more complicated and fragile our food security becomes, right? Like, in fact, that's the antithesis. The more removed and geographically and from a system standpoint, steps in even if it's not a long distance, but the steps to get something somewhere, it's like, that's the opposite of food security. Security is being close by and having as few steps as possible to get it going from, say, Brad McIntyre, who comes, it's fantastic. We put a cooler out on our porch, and when they come and drop it off, it's like, 5 or 6 a.m. or something. And it's literally like you open up the cooler and the carcass fairy has showed up. And like, then you have all this great, man, their pork is so off the hook. Mm-hmm. I've never had pork like it before. It's so good. And their chicken, I quite literally, the first chicken we cooked from them, I'm like, what is this? Like, I've never, because we do a lot of like broiler chickens out of, Costco, just get the double pack and fine. And then we got one from McIntyre. I'm like, this is the best chicken I've ever had in my life. Like, I don't even know what they did to this damn thing, but they did something. And then you find out they have cool operation. But yeah, like, Brad literally delivers food, like we're one step removed. And of course, there's a processing facility. I believe they use Northwest premium meats. So there is a processor, but I'm very connected to Brad. Right. Mm-hmm. And I really, really like that. It's important to me, and perhaps it's not important to everybody, but I feel more secure in knowing that it's like Brad can supply me with food.
Right. Exactly. Another example we have that is our farmers markets, right? Treasure Valley and other places across Idaho. We have a very robust farmer market community here in Idaho. So all those local vegetables, fruits, orchards, and everything like that being delivered. I think another unique opportunity you have here in your own community here in Dry Creek Ranch is that you've got a community farm.
Oh, Dan is the best.
Right?
Yeah, Farmer Dan. I've had him on many times, yeah.
Right. And so, I give major snaps to the developer here that did Dry Creek Ranch. That this used to be a big grow area for Ada County back in the day. Sadly, we still had to find a place to put houses. They're here now. And so I'm not going to, be mournful and sad about that. I'm going to celebrate the fact that there was actually some visionary and somebody said, hey, you know what? We can still grow local food and have that be part of a really nice place for people to live. Yeah. And last time I talked to Dan, I think he had over 90 CSAs here in the community. Plus he's got the little market on the side.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, he's great. One thing about the farmers market here is in these areas is there was a culture of farmers market in my former state of California. And like, I grew up going to farmers market that was behind my mom's apartment. And It was pretty cool. And again, I grew up in an area, I grew up in Concord, but it was right next to Walnut Creek. My mom had grown up in Walnut Creek, and it was literally just walnut orchards. And you would see the vestiges of old, ranching operations and whatnot and farming operations. But, obviously the area developed. But the farmers markets changed from being locally grown produce to, you would find out if you went there early enough, there was just a big semi that pulled up with a bunch of produce from wherever it got grown. And the people owning the booths would buy this produce that they hadn't grown and weren't really connected to, and then just sell it in an open air market format. So it was like, okay, this is not a farmer's market in the manner that people anticipated is, as in like, oh, that's, Farmer Dan, and Farmer Dan grew those radishes, or Farmer Dan grew those, grew that kale, whatever it is like, no, Dan just bought the kale from like the truck that came, and like Dan's stall has the kale. And I always found that distasteful. When I realized that was happening, it's just like, just one more thing where it's like, what in the hell kind of society are we living? Like, but that's not, at least that hasn't been my experience here. My experience here is really like, no, I baked that, baked good, or like, no, I grew that thing. And it's a much better system.
Yeah. Well, it hasn't happened here yet. So, and the reason I say yet is that I can't speak directly to what happened in California, but I can guess, and I will guess is the fact is that, one of the biggest challenges that we have with local food is affordable access to land and water.
Right.
The reason Farmer Dan is doing what he's doing is because this developer made that commitment to say that we're going to incorporate affordable land and water access into this community, right? And so if we look at other organizations like Global Gardens in Boise, that is a partnership between the city of Boise and another nonprofit that is helping with the integration of new Americans. And so these are new Americans that are using farming practices to grow food and then use those foods not only for their own families, but then to generate income from those foods, right? In order to support and integrate into American culture. And so, there's the issue that we have is that as we continue to grow in population, back to development pressure,
yes,
right? Then those lands, which were used primarily for agriculture, are now higher and higher value for development use, right? And so what happens is that these smaller farmers get priced out.
So at a certain point, I had Lori Bishop on, who was running for senator in Middleton, I believe. I think District 10. I'm not 100% sure, but she was talking about how her family farm, I believe her dad was a wheat farmer up in northern Idaho somewhere, and he had recently sold his land, and she was very, it affected her, right? Because as we're kind of talking about, it's over. Right? Like that operation's never coming back. And that's at some point, again, she was articulating, look, you have these people, they invest and work really hard, and they work this land, and this is the return. So it's like, you can't fault them. And especially with what you were saying, which is as you have an increasing, not just duration of time of like, hey, I'm getting older and I don't know, I don't have a succession plan or whatever it might be, but also the astronomical value that comes with increasing values of property, especially in this area. It's like, how could you look at somebody operating? It's almost like, how do you afford to keep operating? It's almost one of those things where it's like, there's so many pressures, so that's kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're one of the answers to that, which is there are all these mounting pressures. We need a pressure relief valve or a solution to this in some way. And that's where Farmlands and Trust comes in.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I say this when I'm out and about, and that is that, every farm, every ranch, every working forest, uniquely its own, right? Whether it's the topography of the land, the type of soils it has, the water rights, the quality of water rights that it has, any number of things make it uniquely its own. And so for that reason, there's no one size fits all solution in order to promote ag viability at that operation. What we've got to do is that, we as a community, whether that be agribusiness, whether that be elected officials, whether that be the planning community, academia, right? University of Idaho Extension, any of us stakeholders in ag right now, the onus is on us is to develop a robust toolbox of any number of tools that we can come to the ranch gate or the farm gate with and be able to say, okay, where are you today? What is the operation that you want to leave to the next generation? Now, what are the tools that we have in our toolbox to help you create that and do that, right? And so, you had Braden on a couple of weeks ago. He talked about House Bill 608, the new APA. That is one of our newest tools in the toolbox, right? It has the word protection in it. And so really what we're talking about that is that that's a planning tool, right? That is a planning tool that has been created that now is for the counties to be able to, essentially what that is for working landowners now be able to message directly to the county planning system to say, I intend to be in business for the next 20 years. So rather than planning over me or through me or around me, you have to plan for me, right? So that's really what the APA is all about. And so really excited to see what Farm Bureau is going to do with that over the next couple of years. Looking forward to them adding a financial incentive to that because I think that's key.
Right.
And for them to be successful with that.
And naturally, there are incentives, non-monetary incentives for this indication. So if I raise my hand and say, hey, I have this land, I'm currently utilizing it, I'm going to be in business, and I want to engage in this 20-year plan, there are benefits like, okay, with planning ordinances or zoning things, there are mechanisms that go into effect that prevent changes that otherwise could be manipulated if I was just a guy farming and, they're like, all right, well, we're going to rezone or we're going to do this, or I don't think he said anything about eminent domain, but perhaps that was a piece of it. Anyway, but again, there are these benefits that are not monetary, but also give you, you all right over there?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, no, it's fine. So there are these benefits, not monetary, but there are things that help preserve that land from manipulation or intrusion from a city or planning standpoint as well.
Yeah, we definitely had some other benefits in there other than financial. First of all, is it protects the current ag zoning that's already in place, right? And says that cannot be upzoned without my permission. It brings the current Right to Farm Act and brings those protections, and those now have to be considered at the local planning level. And then it does have eminent domain protections in that.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
All right. And so it has exceptions for signed highways. So any signed highways that are already in place, then if those have to be expanded, then there's exceptions for that. But any other sort of infrastructure expansions, water, sewer, anything of that nature, then there are those protections, right? And so our Farm Bureau was successful in getting those benefits in there.
It's awesome.
And so we're looking forward to the benefits of that. Now, I want to get to the one thing that you've been so patient for.
I've been waiting.
And I want to do a shout out to Tammy for being very brave and willing to tackle the topic of conservation easements. I know that you brought that up with her. And then Braden did a fantastic job. Listened to his podcast, and he did a fantastic job of talking about conservation easements for somebody that's not his specialty. And so
but it is your specialty.
It is my specialty.
You are the guy.
Here I am.
Scoot into the mic. Here we go. Keep scooting back.
Okay.
We're going to rock.
I'm mic shy here.
I guess so.
I know. It's like this, big thing in my face. Okay, so let's talk about conservation
Next time I'll
easements.
get you a lapel mic so
All
you
right.
can just move around.
So let's finally get into it. All right. So what is a conservation easement? It is a legal tool. All right. And it's a legal tool that we use in order to essentially separate what are called my right to develop from my land. Okay. So I own 40 acres. Okay. I'm just making this up. Little case study here. Let's say I own 40 acres of agricultural land. And so with that 40 acres, then I have a bundle of rights, right? My private property rights to do with that land, and I think this is always important, as zoned. Okay. And here in Idaho, various counties have various zoning, right? It's basically our local land use planning act designates zoning at a county level. Okay. And so, each agricultural zoning can look differently in each county, but basically I have the right to do with my land as zoned agriculture. So there's this bundle of rights that I have, and you're probably familiar with some of these rights. These rights are going to be my water rights, my mineral rights, maybe oil and gas rights, right? Sounding familiar? I also have a right to develop. Now, if we're in urban areas, one of the things that we see explored often is what we call now air rights. Have you heard of that?
No, this is wild. Okay.
So the concept is that, let's say I own a single-story building in a downtown urban area. Well, I own vertically above me. And so I can actually sell those air rights above me to a neighbor if they want to protect their view. Right? So,
wow.
Very cool.
Did you ever see, I think it was Ocean's, it was like Ocean's 11 or Ocean's 12 or something. And Matt Damon is playing the like right-hand man to the super rich Korean guy or whoever. And he's like, I looked, the bad guy's like, I looked your guy up, like I didn't find anything. He's like, just try to build anything over 30 feet. He owns all of the airspace over, this province. He's like, try to build anything over 50 feet and find out who you run into.
That's it.
And they were looking at him like, he owns the airspace. What the hell?
There you go. That's it.
Yeah,
right?
It's pretty wild.
So we have these bundle of rights that come with land ownership, right? Depending on how it's zoned. And so what we have the ability to do as our private property rights is that we can separate our right to develop. And that has a value. When we do that, in order to do that, then we need a legal tool to do that. And that is called an easement. All right. Now, easements are, just as I mentioned how every farm, ranch, and working forest is different, then easements are the same way. Easements are very personal. Because they're very personal, and because that easement needs to be held by a third entity, an easement is recorded on title, but because I'm separating my right to develop, then I need a third party that's going to hold that right to develop because it's in perpetuity, it's forever, because I'm not going to be around forever. I need basically a partnership, a relationship with a third entity that is going to be around forever, that's going to guarantee that whatever my wishes are in that easement to protect that development right are seen forward, right? And since now this is what is the trust, the land trust.
So you take the rights and you drop it into the trust. And the trust becomes like the vault that stores and honors
holds the easement.
Right.
Holds the easement, right? And so, what we saw is that in the land trusts have been around forever, by the way. This is nothing novel. In fact, I was just doing some research and I was surprised myself to learn that like the first land trust showed up in Massachusetts like in 1891. I was shocked to realize how long they've been around. Pretty latent and quiet until about the 1980s. And really what we saw in the 80s is that historic grow regions in New England and the mid-Atlantic really started to suburbanize very fast. And so upstate New York, areas of Maryland, Virginia started to develop really, really fast. And some of the best farmland in those states. And so what we saw is that was a movement then for people to say, hey, can we protect our farmland? And if so, can we do this thing called an agricultural easement, right? We hear the term conservation easement. There's groundwater easements. There's wildlife easements. There's all kinds of easements out there. But in the business I'm in, we're in the business of agricultural easements, right?
Gotcha.
And what these do is that essentially it says, you're a farm, you're a ranch, you're a working forest, keep doing what you're doing. This easement simply says that your ability to subdivide and or do any sort of development of your land beyond growing food is taken away. And now this land trust is going to hold this easement in perpetuity on your behalf, so that whether it's, your future generations of your family that still hold the land, or if the land is sold to somebody else, it's guaranteed that this is still going to be used for agricultural purposes in the future.
Now, here's the great question. Understood on everything you've said. And in fact, my wife and my 12-year-old, we have been playing hot rounds of Monopoly lately. And I really enjoy the deal, right? Which is like, okay, you sell me this property, I will give you 50% profit sharing on, and I have to develop it. I got to build the houses and the hotel, and you'll get 50%. Or like, doing these, even giving one big play is to get one person selling me a property, and I give them complete exemptions so they don't have to pay anything. So it only hurts the other person if they land on it. And then I get that person to sell me property, and then I give them exemptions over here, so that it's like, okay, I have something hurting both of you that I got from the other person. It's like all of these little things, right? The art of the deal. But at the end of the day, that person is not giving up, like I'm not giving up my right to charge rent for no reason, right? And these property owners who are like, hey, I am going to detach my right to develop and set it over here forever, and you guys are going to pay attention to it and take care of it. It will distinctly decrease my ability with this property. That's the whole nature of it. I will no longer have the ability to do these things, which absolutely decreases the capital value of the property, or at least let's make the argument that it does, because there will always, even if you can't develop it now, there might be a time in the future when you could develop it and it's worth more as a development, whatever it might be. Why do I do that? Besides the feel good, I want to preserve this. I think it's important philosophically. I do not think that engaging or asking people to engage in business agreements just for positive sentiment for the world is that's not a good policy, right? Like we have to do things that are in people's best interest. And that's what we should expect. They should always act in their best interest, however they want to manipulate that. So why do they do this? Like, what's the benefit, direct benefit to them?
Sure. It's, generally it's basically business management, business economics. And so that development right, that right to develop, has a value.
Okay. This is where we're going. Okay. So you got your 40 acres, you give up your right to develop, and that has an economic value.
It has a value, right?
What's that value?
Oh, yeah, right. I wish I had the magic calculator.
Come on, something. You got 40 acres. It's right off of Beacon. What's the value? Like,
right. Yeah. So you bought this house that we're in right now.
Sure.
Right. And did you finance it?
I did.
Okay. So when you went to finance it, that lender said you needed to get an appraisal. Yes. Right. To prove that the offer that you made on this house was basically worth what the market says it is.
Sure.
Right. So no different with easements.
Sure.
Okay.
So you get an appraiser that comes and looks at your 40 acres and says, okay, if you were to sell this to a developer today, then the idea would be worth this much per developer, or fair market value, whatever that is. And okay, I'm totally wrong. God bless. This is why you're here, because that's what I've always thought happens. What happens? I will be quiet. I promise.
Yeah, no. But thanks for the lead in. Thanks for the lead in, and I really appreciate that. And that is often where we start the conversation with our working landowners, and can be a point of confusion. It's not that. What we do is that we appraise the value of development rights on a parcel of land relative to other easements in that same neighborhood or in that same region. So basically, there's a whole market out there, right? There's a whole market of conservation easements or agricultural easements that there's a special group of appraisers. This is their unique niche, that they know where these deals are being done out there. So, let's say Land Trust of Treasure Valley, that's who's local here, right? So let's say Land Trust of Treasure Valley is looking at doing an easement out in the Middleton foothills. Well, they're going to look at the last 2 to 3 years of closings that they've had on other easements in the Treasure Valley area as comps, right? In order to determine what the value of that easement's going to be for that project in the Middleton foothills. So that's how that value is determined. And so I always like to tell my landowners that the value of your development right has nothing to do with the development value of the land. Two very different things.
Okay. But there has to come a point where somebody says, okay, your 40 acres as agriculture is worth $1 million. Just as agriculture, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
And your 40 acres going to a developer would be worth, let's say, $1,500,000.
Mm-hmm.
And so the difference by letting up that capacity, that difference is really that $500,000 delta. That doesn't ever factor into what the easement is worth, because that's literally what you're losing if you give up that right. Or am I thinking about that totally wrong?
Not apples to apples. Not apples to apples.
So wild. Why? Okay.
Now an appraiser who specializes in easements, all right, will take into consideration if my 40 acres is in what I would call the path of growth.
Sure. If it's right next to a development, it's been moving east to west, you're west of the most recent development, you're obviously the target.
Sure. Like,
Right.
so, if it looks like I might be in the path of growth, there might be some development pressure coming, then that might be a consideration in their appraisal, but it's not the sole basis for the appraisal.
Wild time. So
Right.
the specialty appraiser comes out, does an appraisal, and says, okay, to give up, to engage in this conservation easement and give up this chunk of your right to this land trust, we'll give you X number of dollars. And presumably that money is sufficient enough or appropriate enough for this landowner to say, okay, this is worth it today for me to do this, even though I don't know what the value will be tomorrow, 10 years from now, 100 years from now. This is worth it for me today, and I will keep farming on this and move on with my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then what that does is that creates some instant liquidity then for that landowner to do any number of things, right? It could be to buy more land, right? Grow the operation. It could be part of succession and say, okay, you know what, we're going to use some of this money to help buy mom and dad out so that the next generation can come in without such a large buyout burden.
Sure.
Right. Any number of things that money can be used in order to stand up and strengthen that operation.
Wow. How common is this?
Not very.
Okay. Well, here's
Not very. And I will tell you why is that, here in Idaho, we don't have the luxury at the moment of any sort of what we call sort of what's called a state match. All right. So now we're going to get down to the weeds.
I was actually going to ask you who funds this.
We're going to get into the weeds.
All right, here we go.
And so where does this money come from? So if a land trust decides that they've got a good project with a landowner to do an easement, now they have to come up with that money, right? So the appraisal says, so let's just pretend. And anybody out there in the big world, these numbers are not real.
Well,
so I'm just going to make this up.
For which property, right?
Right.
Anyway, so we're making it up.
So let's say I got my 40 acres and let's say the land trust comes back and the appraiser says that my easement on my 40 acres is worth $500,000.
Oh, you're rolling in it now, baby.
Right.
$500,000.
$500,000.
Yes.
And so now the land trust has to come up with $500,000. And so, I'll tell you what, our land trusts here in Idaho run pretty skinny. And so, not a lot of it is one of the things that I always tell about the great state of Idaho is we're still less than 2 million people. And so when it comes to donor dollars, right, it's a pretty shallow pool, right? We're all really competing for a lot of the same dollars. And so when it comes to permanent protection and conservation, we work hard. We work really, really hard for that. The main source of those dollars is that we have a federal program. So USDA, Department of Agriculture, through the Natural Resource Conservation Service, has a program that will offer up to 50% of the value of that easement through a program. And our program here in Idaho has been cranking. They have been doing good for the last 3 years. We have grown year over year in our allocation here in Idaho. And it's kind of a chicken and egg sort of program. And so our previous state conservation at NRCS really set us up. I'm part of a team, both folks, full-time staff at NRCS, some consultants that were hired over at Idaho Coalition of Land Trust. They're called agricultural land easement coordinators that have been supporting our land trusts. Myself out in front being that voice that's promoting, marketing this and that, everything like that. So we've really been able to grow capacity over the last 3 years, and we've gotten out of the single-digit millions into the double-digit millions in dollars placed on the ground in the last 3 years. So that's a great thing for Idaho. But it's still just 50%, right?
I was going to say, where's the other 50% come from?
So the IRS gives a landowner the ability to donate that other 50%, all right? So in other cases, then a land trust might have another program available. There are a number of other programs. For a while there, Bonneville Power Administration. I don't know if you're familiar with BPA, but they're big hydroelectric power provider on the Upper Columbia.
The dams, right?
The dams. And so they had what were called salmon mitigation dollars available for a while there, and so we saw a number of easements in the Upper Columbia watersheds. Going out to branches that were protecting those the spawning habitat, right, for anadromous fish across Idaho for a number of years. So that's an example of where some other funding can come from. The challenge that we have with that 50% donation is that, and the nice thing is IRS gives us 15 years to buy that down. So it's not like a one and done. You can push that off over 15 years, but still, if you think about it, if you're a smaller ranch or a smaller farm operation, and you're kind of fluttering up and down that profit or loss threshold year over year, you may not be able to, so let's say back to my 40 acres, right? I'm worth $500,000 on my easement. They get me $250 on the government program. I still got $250,000 to donate. Maybe I have a couple of bad years, crops fail, whatever, this and that. Maybe I'm not that great of a farmer, or I'm not that great of a rancher, and I had to sell cows off or something like that. It might not pencil for me to be able to ever write down that full 250.
Now, you're not actually donating 250 because the second 250 doesn't exist anywhere theoretically. You're just talking about using it as a write-off?
Yes, correct, right?
Right, because you're like, hey, here's your 250. Mm-hmm. And then here's this imaginary 250 that we'll let you write off as a donation. Yeah. But you don't actually get it. So if I want to donate, I don't know, to Boise Rescue Mission, I'm like, well, I got 250 to donate. I'm going to donate to Boise. Bill Roscoe, he's fantastic. Let's donate 250 to him. There's no 250 that goes to Bill Roscoe. They don't benefit. It's just I get to write that off from whatever profit I may have had. But to get the benefit from that presupposes turning a profit.
Correct.
Right. I have to get the 250 threshold to write off the 250.
Yeah. Right.
So I get taxes. Say my tax threshold or my tax bracket was 30% overall, then I would get $75,000 of tax savings over a certain amount of time from my donation. So I get my 250 and then I get 75,000, which is my tax savings. But again, only if I'm turning a profit.
Yeah. Yeah. So what we do is that it shrinks that pool of eligibility. So back to your question, right? How many people are really using this, right? Do you see how that shrinks our pool?
Oh, sure. You have to be profitable. You have to have, you have to want to engage in this.
You've got to be a certain scale, right? You've got to be a certain scale of operation. I think you've got to be a certain level of sophistication of operation too, in order to really, truly be able to leverage that. And, to a certain extent, I wonder, at what point do we hit a level of saturation in Idaho because of that? And so, one of the things that I'm tasked with is, as far as AFT and policy here in Idaho, is starting to lay the groundwork for us to narrow that gap so that we can do a better job of serving our smaller farmers and ranchers. So they're not so full dependent on that full 50% donation, right? How can we get more dollars to the table? Is really what I'm working on right now.
What is the strategy to do that?
Well, it's Idaho. It's Idaho. And I say that proudly. I don't say that, I don't say that negatively. I say that proudly in the fact that we are, a small state government, light touch, and not a lot of taxes. And so I think one of the things that interests me the most right now is actually a state tax income credit, right? And so, and the idea would be is that if I were to, I do my 40 acres, I get a $500,000 easement value on my easement. Government's willing to give me half of that, $250,000, right?
And that's the federal government.
That's the federal government. Well, and and everybody, I know everybody's got their opinion about the feds and good or bad and this and that, whatever. And I just simply got to say, this is yours and I's taxpayer dollars coming back, reinvested in the ground in Idaho. This is about longevity. This is about protecting, right, those food systems. And so I think it's a good thing for us to see those dollars come back to us that way. It's protecting our land base. And so, if I've got that other 250,000, right, that I'm donating, that's actually seen as also as income. That's also designated as income on my state income tax. So if we could actually get a credit for that, a state credit for that, and more importantly, a credit that I could trade, that I could sell to somebody else that needed that credit more than I did, back to that small farm, small ranch kind of concept. This is something that's been working in Colorado for over 20 years and working very well in Colorado for over 20 years. Some recent data that's come out of Colorado is that for every dollar of state income tax that Colorado did not collect on a conservation easement, it has resulted in $49 of reinvestment at the local level.
Wow. Is that just by the nature of the land use, which like once you build a house, you're not getting tax benefit, like you're not producing anything. It's just a place that pays property tax, but totally juxtaposed to, okay, we're actually producing things here. We're producing things that people locally buy and sell. We're producing things that, people pay taxes on, all those different. So that's the idea, which is, okay, this benefits everyone. And the tax coffers actually benefit when we save properties and don't build houses. Mm-hmm. Oh, so then it's theoretically within the state's best long-term interest from a tax collection standpoint and from a revenue standpoint to maintain more operational land and fewer houses. Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you just get into a long-term state investment of, hey, help us make you more money and feed more people.
Yeah. Let's talk about that. You just queued me up. Let's talk about cost of community services, because I think this is really important for us here in Idaho right now. So our county governments are very, very dependent upon property taxes. All right. So our state legislature over a decade ago passed legislation that limits local option taxes. All right. These would be sales taxes that cities or governments would put in place of any kind. The one exception is that our recreational communities can do recreational taxes for like hotel rooms and of that nature. And those monies have to be used exclusively to help grow that community recreationally, to help support tourism, right? But otherwise, no local option taxes here in Idaho to help support growth. So when we talk about cost of community services at the county level, then our counties are shouldering the cost of, most importantly, public education, right? Big, big cost. Second is public health. Third, emergency services. Fourth, transportation, roads, right? Those are all very expensive. I'm not discounting others, but those are all the big ticket items right there. So University of Idaho did a study in 1997. They looked at 3 counties across the state. They looked at Canyon County here in the Treasure Valley, Cassia County in the Magic Valley, and then Kootenai County up in the Panhandle. Then Idaho Farm Bureau Federation asked BYU Idaho to update this report in 2019. So we're still only 5 years old. I think that's relevant. And so what they found, and this is interesting, and I'll circle back on this, but what they found is that here in Idaho right now, and actually let's talk about Canyon County since that's closest to us home in Treasure Valley, right? So in Canyon County in 2019, for every dollar of property tax that was collected, it only cost the county 40 cents on the dollar to provide services to agricultural zoned land.
So the net benefit for ag zone land was 60 cents for every dollar. They're like, we can take the 60 cents and do something else with it because we don't have to run emergency services. We don't have to provide schools. We have very few, people relative to the land mass.
You got it. So then we move over to commercial category. And then I always like to inform people that when we look at agribusiness in Idaho, the vast majority of our commercial property is agricultural related, right? Because we have such a high amount of agribusiness. So commercial, it only goes up to 50 cents on the dollar. Now, when we go and look at residential, any guesses?
I bet for every dollar they pull in with taxes for a house, it's $1.30 to provide services.
Well done. It's $1.40.
Damn it, I was so close.
You were so close.
So close. So it's a net negative overwhelmingly, and the agriculture is actually funding the city services to the residential.
I like to use the word subsidizing.
Subsidizing.
Mm-hmm.
Generally related to money, which is related to funding. I don't know. Either way, however we want to say it.
Right. So really what we're looking at is that, the path that we're basically on a path of insolvency at the county level.
Makes sense. I shouldn't say funding. That's not fair. That implies that agriculture is bringing all of the monies. You're right. Subsidizing is a far better word, right? Like homeowners are paying taxes and people are not happy about the taxes they're paying. Nobody's happy with the taxes they're paying. Fine. But they are paying some. They're just not paying all of the cost of existence.
Right. So this, if the way to think about it is that if we pave over all of it, then we're going to lose that subsidy, right? We're totally going to lose that subsidy. So the question is that, and I want to be really careful here and be mindful of this, is that, I'm not anti-development. We need safe shelter for people to live.
Affordable.
Just as much as we need healthy food for people to eat. All right. My challenge to everybody in Idaho is that how do we do that in take a systems approach and do that in a way that we can have both, because we can have both. And the reason we know we can have both is because we've got 40 plus years of history of watching this happen in other parts of the country, right? Like we had the luxury of being a flyover state for a very, very long time. And this happened in other parts of the world. So it's here now. People have discovered us. Everybody wants their own little piece of Idaho. Okay. All right. But now's not the time to stick our head in a hole in the ground. Now's the time to say, okay, let's get real about this. Most importantly, instead of saying, oh, we've got to protect ag, and we need more tools, Yes, but yet the easiest thing we can do to protect ag is to build better cities. It's the easiest thing we can do, right? Like our modeling that we do at AFT shows that when we build better cities, it takes development pressure off ag land by as much as 50%. So, one of the things that's going on here in Idaho right now that we have a bad case of is what I call low density residential.
So people building a house on an acre or two.
Yep. Absolutely.
And I was going to ask, what does a better city mean? And I assume that means higher density housing. You can fit more people in comfortably and appropriately, right? I'm not talking like the honeycomb apartments of Japan or something, but you fit more people into a better area, reduce car traffic, like just plan them better as far as city goes. And that doesn't mean you start pushing out into places like Dry Creek Ranch. So the property doesn't cost quite, or the value, the easement value is not quite as high. So farmers or ranchers don't feel like they're walking away from quite as much by continuing an operation. And it's easier to operate, obviously, because you don't have houses cropping up everywhere or tractors are fighting for road space and whatnot. All of those things would theoretically lead to a symbiotic relationship where you have your agricultural land and development you have your agricultural operations that are subsidizing part of the existence of better cities. And obviously, if you have more higher density of populations within cities, you also have ease with offering emergency services naturally. So it costs less to get an ambulance 2 blocks than an ambulance, 3 miles, things of that nature. Am I kind of like wrapping around what you're getting at?
Yeah. And, and I would soften a little bit. Not everybody wants to live in a 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo high rise.
I do not.
Right?
I absolutely do not. I'm a terrible person. I want an acre.
Yeah.
So I'm part of the problem. I want 40 acres.
And you're not the problem. You're not the problem. Okay. What the problem is that if we're going to create low density residential, then we need to keep it low density residential. But we don't. What happens here in Idaho, 2 things happen here in Idaho. And that is that, and we can look at 2 different examples. The first is that I will tell you that our modeling shows that, let's use my 40 acres again.
Sure.
Okay. So let's say you're my neighbor. So let's say I decide to stay in business. Let's say I do the APA. I stay in business for, I do an APA for 20 years. And in that 20-year window, you decide to sell out. You've got 40 acres next to me. You sell out. And you decide to do low density residential. So you decide to do 8 5s. All right. So you've got 8 5-acre parcels next to me. Well, then 20 years down the road, path of growth has come over, it's time. And so my parcel at this point, according to our modeling, and this is just crazy, is 100 times more likely now to be subdivided into a much higher density development because of the LDR that's already next to me.
Oh, so it's the combination of high density and then low density that screws things up.
Uh-huh. And so what we don't do is that if we're going to say this area is going to be low density residential, we don't say then that whole area is going to be low density residential, first of all. And then secondly, I don't know if you've been around long enough, but for a little while, there was a lot of this Save Old Hill Road kind of thing.
I don't know. Save Old Hill Road.
So that's here in Boise. So Old Hill Road used to be sort of like one of the original ag areas of Boise. Probably starting in the 70s, became low density residential. Started seeing, those farms started to be fragmented into 5s and smaller parcels and stuff like that. Well, now Boise's even denser now, right? And they're having to find room for more people. And so that LDR is, guess what, is now being even subdivided into smaller and smaller parcels, right? So my observation is that we don't, if we're going to create LDR, we need to keep it LDR. Because if we allow LDR to be further subdivided and further densified in the future, then that market for LDR is going to do what? It's going to go find another place to go. And where does it go? The next ring of farmland out. Do you see how that works?
Yeah. So let's say there are 100 people that want low density residential, no matter what. And you're saying, hey, look, if we have 100 people situated in low density residential here, let's not sacrifice that for slightly higher densities, because then that blob of 100 people are just going to shift and keep moving out farther and farther away. So the solution then theoretically would be leave the low density residential. So those 100 people, that 100-person blob, they get to hang out there and just go much higher density somewhere else. Stop replacing the LDR with slightly higher density, find some other plot or increase density of existing parcels.
Yeah. I mean, I think that the city of Boise did a really fantastic thing with their new modern zoning code. Because what they've said is that let's increase the density where we already have services, right? We already have a concentration of services along these major boulevards. And so the added resources that we need to take to a city to increase further amenities along these boulevards that allow us then to increase vertical heights and populations along these boulevards, that totally makes sense, right? Doesn't mean that they just cast a wide net across the whole city and said the whole city is going to go vertical. They said, no, let's concentrate it where we have the greatest amount of amenities, right? So what that does is that creates a room for a mix of all kinds of housing types for all kinds of people with all kinds of tastes of how they like to live. Instead of saying, you know what, any LDR in the future is subject to further density, higher densities. And what I like to do is I like to flip that and say, how is that any different on the agricultural side? Because what we have on the agricultural side is we have, 3+ generations, hundreds of years of investment in infrastructure. We have irrigation infrastructure. We have farm to market road infrastructure. We have collation and distribution and food industry infrastructure that's all in place, right? And so show me the logic of just dropping subdivisions down in the middle of that and essentially cashing it out, right? We're selling the cow before we've fully milked it.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
Right.
And theoretically, there's no end to capacity to milk the cow. It's not
right.
like that land we're like, all right, we got 10 more years. The land's going to be barren, unworkable. We won't be able to get our tax revenue from it. We won't be able to do any of these things. So like, let's just wait another 10 years and then we'll pop it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, again, completely not reversible.
Yeah.
Like, it never goes back to operational land.
Right. Yeah. A good friend of mine and colleague in this business is Mary Huff. She's planning director for Owyhee County, somebody I highly recommend you get on your guest list.
Oh, I'd love her. Yeah.
And so I'm going to do my best to quote her because I think she does a really good job with this one. And that is that, so let's say Simplot owns, 2 square blocks of downtown Boise. They're not going to go into city planning and say, we want to put a feedlot on these 2 square blocks in downtown Boise.
Sure.
Conflict of use, right? Obvious conflict of use. So then how is that any different from a developer coming out and saying, we're going to drop to a 200 home subdivision in the middle of this highly productive farming area, right? It's a conflict of use. It's the exact same thing, but we don't think that way, right? We, unfortunately, our planners, and I love our planners, they do a good job, but what did they go to school to do? Urban planning. We don't teach our planners to proactively plan for agriculture. Sadly, we just assume that our farmland is this bank that, oh, I've got to grow. Well, let's go cash out some more farmland, right? So back to this whole sort of idea of cost of community services. I think that the big challenge on our county governments right now is to take a step back and say, wait a minute, especially in our counties where they're very dependent upon agriculture, agribusiness is a big chunk of their economies, is to say, we've got to keep a portion of this alive. Like, this is a part of our long-term health as a county government in order for us to balance our books. Where is the best infrastructure? Where is the best soils, the highest productivity? Where do we have families that want to stay on the land, want to stay in business? And how are we going to bring the resources to the table for them to continue to be successful? Because that is in the best interest of not only them, but also the cities, right? We're all in this together. And now we're going to help these cities do what they can to build better cities, because that's going to take the pressure off the farmland and the ranches.
I was hoping you would come in today and just explain conservation easements, but the picture you have painted is so much more complex and comprehensive. And like I had somebody in who was running for Ada County Commissioner earlier this year, who was talking about the increase in density in cities being essentially a ploy to increase the Democratic vote within city centers, because Democrats classically, and I was like, I don't see where this guy's going. Whatever, it doesn't matter. But obviously it's like, okay, I don't think the city planners are sitting down, or at least it would be shocking to me to imagine that city planners are sitting down saying, or broader, community planners sitting down saying, okay, look, this is what we're going to manipulate, like the political leanings of people by like, building townhouses or something closer to city centers and higher density stuff. What you're talking about though makes perfect sense, which is if we have a certain group of people that are going to want certain types of housings, and if we get this enormous benefit from agricultural basis. Let me, if I may, specifically to this point, which is, hey, look, if we're agriculture and we get, it's like 40 cents on the dollar or something like that, and then we keep the other 60 cents to subsidize, we as in the county, we subsidize then the residentials that are not building as much. If we push out within, let's say, Ada County, all of a sudden we eliminate all of the agricultural areas within this county. The existing tax structure says, okay, but we're spending $1.40 on every house that exists here, and we no longer have that subsidy of the agriculture. Does that mean it's like, okay, everybody, we got to make up that 40 cents delta? Like, we're going to have to increase your taxes. So this is the path. Eliminating agriculture is the path to higher taxation for urban centers that have now lost their subsidizing partner with the food industry, agriculture industry.
Mm-hmm.
Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, that's wild.
And now layer in the fact that how much of our growth in the county is low density residential, because those costs of community services are now being spread out over a less dense area, right? So low density residential has an expectation of city grade services, but now those are having to be spread out over a wider area.
Right. Chief Stowell from Canyon County came in. He's the emergency services ambulance service, essentially. And he was talking about this exact thing. He's like, and we have a large portion of our, obviously ambulance services go to older people. Those people are on, I believe it's Medicare, Medicaid, which one? It's one of them. And anyway, government funded health insurance, all of these problems. He's like, and we're covering this gigantic area. We cannot keep up. We're taking a loss every single day.
Right.
We're funded by, levy and some reimbursement, but the reimbursement's trash. That's what he was getting at, which is like the distance we have to travel now is, and if you want lower ambulance times, right? Do you want to wait for 12 minutes or something if you've had a heart attack, or do you want 5 minutes? Because I mean, that delta could be the difference between life and death, permanent damage, and not. Man, this is a very clear picture now of what's happening.
It reminds me of something else I was going to tell you about, an example of low density residential. So an area, it's unincorporated southwest Boise.
Okay.
All right. So that area down there used to be farm ground up until about, and I lived out there in the 70s as a kid. It was still mostly farm ground out there. Switched over to low density residential 70s and 70s and 80s out there, right? And so here in the last couple of years, wells started going dry. So a lot of those folks are out there on private wells. So here's the signature of low density residential: private well, septic tank. Okay, that's right, because you don't have any of those municipal services. So wells started going dry out there. City of Boise has no intentions of annexing any of that time any soon. Why? It's expensive, right? The city has a certain standard of services that they want to meet within their city of limits, and they're like, that's going to bankrupt us to have to try and extend services to that large area. So they're being frugal, right? Saying, you know what, we can't expand out there. So, County looks at that, they start talking, how do we fix this? And so, just some early research, what I generally found out is that it cost $25,000 a home to connect those folks up to municipal water. So another issue that we have with low density residential is that, we're kicking the can down the road when it comes to ultimately actually getting these homes back up to city level services in the future. Right? So the question is like, it seems like really great to have my 1 acre, my 1 acre plus right now, and I got room to breathe, and isn't this nice and everything? But my concern is, are we actually creating like the rural slums of 30 or 40 years in the future, where we've got folks that are, not able to, we got cities that are unwilling to extend services because of the cost of those services. And we also have homeowners that don't have the resources to pay for that kind of connectivity. Right? So it's complicated.
Yeah, and I could imagine 100% having an area, like a random area that you go from nice, well-groomed city area to just dilapidated houses because they're like, oh, well, it's going to cost $100,000 to get the water going again and the well, and the house isn't even worth that much anymore, and people just moved out of it or whatever the zoning is. I mean, and you see this with schools. There are areas that I knew from my former state where literally the boundary for a school district was the street, the middle of the street. And whoever was on the north or, whichever side of the street that had the good schools, houses were really well kept. They were very expensive. And the opposite side of the street, less so. Because, and the houses were worth considerably less because they're going to, the school district I went to, which was trash compared to like this better school district that, everybody wanted to get into.
Right.
You have that kind of thing with base things such as utility. And even in that example, the houses that I brought up, you still have people that don't care about school districts. You have people that don't intend to have children, people that are in a different stage of life. They're like, hey, look, it's fine. I don't care about the school district. I like the house. I like the view. I like whatever. But when you start talking about things such as water, everyone cares about water. Everybody cares about having consistent utilities and base services like that. So yeah, when you say, hey, are we creating urban slums in 20 years? That makes sense. It's like you push that far enough down the road, the cost of connectivity to the city continues to astronomically grow, as I'm sure it will, because nothing gets cheaper. So if it's 25 now, in 20 years, I'm sure it'll be like 70 or 100 or something. And then, of course, the cost of the aquifer is obviously the thing that people are draining with the pumps. It's like we're not getting more water out of somewhere, so good Lord, man. This is an interesting picture you're painting.
Yeah, I listening to some of your other podcasts, and I really do appreciate your interest in our water resources here in Idaho. I'm a hydrogeologist by education, and I think one of the things that the work I'm doing now has a lot to do with the fact that I went down to school in Arizona in '87, went to U of A in Tucson in '87, and 87 was the last, I believe, if I remember this correctly, was the last average water year that Arizona has had. It was the start of their drought. And so I'm getting old now. I think that's over 40 years ago and coming in close to it anyway. And so, that time, and I stayed down there for about 25 years. And in that 25 years, I worked in development. And I just saw miles and miles of farmland converted on an annual basis into development. Saw that groundwater, surface water, and groundwater rights converted over to municipal uses, and just a lot of challenges with competing uses. And I think that Arizona has their Groundwater Management Act. I think they've done a really, really good job considering the circumstances that they have. You're from California. I think that you definitely have a good feel for all of the challenges that California is having. Back to that, I mentioned that I'm a prepper. I think one of the things that concerns me, doesn't keep me up at night yet, but concerns me is that You know, how many people live in Southern California? How many people are dependent on Colorado River water in Southern California?
Oh, 20 million.
Right. How many people in the Phoenix metro area depend on Colorado River water?
I'd have to assume in millions and millions.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we know that water scarcity is an issue there now, right? Where are those people going to go? Where are they going to come? Where's the next available water? Right? It's a long haul across the Great Basin Desert, but we're it. Right? The Pacific Northwest is like the next place where the water's at.
We don't have enough water for ourselves.
That's what I'm saying, right? Now, fingers crossed, you know, maybe a lot of those folks will head back to the Great Lakes, and you know, the Rust Belt cities will be a place, find a place for renewal and stuff like that. But I got to tell you, you know, we're a tank of gas for a lot of cars these days, or a tank of gas from the desert Southwest. Those are the kinds of questions I think a lot of our leaders need to be considering these days when we talk about, like, back to my point, systems. Really looking at systems and saying, you know what, are we really planning for community resiliency? Are we setting Idaho up for a different kind of future?
Well, Dave Anderson, my guy, I have so many additional questions, especially with that last little thing, but you've been here for some time. I greatly appreciate your time. I will take any guests that you recommend that can continue talking about this stuff, and you will have to come back on, please, in the future and keep the conversation going, because
Will do.
Again, these are all things that I, as just a recent transplant to the state that I now get to call home, I don't have any idea about this stuff. And I never would know if you hadn't come in and explained this, because I've been talking to people and they're like, well, you got to get Dave Anderson on with, you know, American Land Trust, because even people into the industry, like you pointed out, Tammy and Braden, they both did really good jobs as somebody who, as people that don't live in this world, but the complexities that you're articulating are really important to understand. Man, it's a lot. Anyway, listen, I appreciate you. Is there anything you want to say at the end here?
Thanks so much for having me. Okay. And it's a compliment to say that you want to have me back. That means I passed grade. Yeah. I didn't embarrass you.
No, definitely. You can't embarrass me, because I call myself an idiot all the time. Like, whenever people try to make fun of me online, it's hilarious. I'm like, you can't make fun of me more than I make fun of myself. Here, hold my beer. Watch this. Like, it just, so yeah. No, this is great. You really, I mean, again, a ton to think about. So please come back. We'll do it again. We'll talk some trash.
Sounds good.